Welcome back to Uncommon Sense. Today's guest is an absolute superstar. She spent 20 years reading the news to 40 countries, the calm, respected voice on your screens every single night. Then her own father sued her in the Supreme Court. Her hair turned grey overnight. So she picked up a pen and spent 5 years digging up 140 years worth of her family's history just to understand why. The result? A best-selling memoir, reviewed everywhere from the Vogue Australia to the South China Morning Post. This is Mimi Kwa. All right, Mimi, thank you so much for coming on and giving us an hour of your time, especially on short notice. I really appreciate it. But if we were just to get started, for someone who doesn't know you or doesn't know what you do, what would you tell them?
I would say I'm a mum of 4. I'm a TV presenter. I've been presenting on television for 25 years. I'm an author and a wife and a daughter and a dog mum. I've got 2 dogs and a cat. And I also work in our family business with my husband, which is providing C-suite executive peer mentoring to organisations around Australia.
Yeah, well, cool. So, and on...
So a few things.
Yeah, definitely. You're touching a lot there.
And I'm a meditation teacher.
Yeah, I did pick up on that as well. But your book, is it, and you'd have to help me with the pronunciation, but The House of...
Kwa.
Kwa. Okay, perfect. The House of Kwa. And you dig into a lot there, but what I picked up on initially was the rich history within your family name and being a direct descendant of an emperor, I believe. And anyway, if you, just for the earliest context, I guess, kind of point of view, to stitch everything together for you, take us to your upbringing, being from Perth, I believe, and it was your aunt actually being the first Asian hostess on British Airways, who then allowed you to bring your mum to Australia. So just talk us through, I guess not so much that, but more for yourself growing up in Perth and what that was like.
Well, actually, so just a slight correction there. So this is my dad's side of the family, which is Kwa.
Okay. Yeah.
And yes, I grew up in Perth. So my mum's from England, my dad's from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And I wrote my book because my dad sued me in the Supreme Court of Western Australia over the estate of my late auntie that you referred to.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book because I wanted to figure out why a father would sue his own daughter and what it was about me that made me stand up to him at that time. And so in unpacking 4 generations of my family's history and trying to understand his story and also my auntie's story, that answered a lot of questions about the intergenerational trauma that he had experienced, the direct trauma that he experienced during the Second World War and the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong during the Second World War, which is a story not a lot of people know about. I didn't know a lot about it, even though I'd been handed down stories throughout my childhood and early adulthood about the family experiences. I didn't really weave it all together or stitch it all together or draw the connections to what my dad had experienced as a child when the Japanese were occupying Hong Kong when he was 7, 8, 9 years old. The Japanese occupied Hong Kong for 3 years and 8 months. The schools were shut down. It was like being in, I guess, a modern reference, like being in COVID lockdown, but also with soldiers walking up and down the streets and, some horrific things that were going on. So my dad was living through that as a small child. That can't help but have an impact on somebody's development and conditioning. Yeah. But not only that, he was the youngest boy of 32 children. Wow. So imagine that, 32 siblings in a family, and he was the youngest boy, and my grandfather had 3 wives at the same time. And so that's how they had so many children. But in those days in China and Hong Kong, you could, it was polygamist based, and a man could take as many wives as he wanted. And also there was no one-child policy at the time. So, lots of families, particularly wealthy families, were having lots of kids. So my dad was a product of that era, and he and his family lost everything during the Japanese occupation during the Second World War. And after that period, my auntie then, going back to your reference at the beginning of our chat, my auntie then went on to become the first Chinese air hostess for British Airways, which was back in those days in the 50s was called BOAC, B-O-A-C. Yeah. And she was part of, crews of airships of 15 passengers. It was only the elite and the very wealthy who could afford to fly in those days. And as a result of that, she made a lot of very interesting friends. So my book really talks around a lot of her adventures. And with nobility, she was rubbing shoulders and friends with royals, and she was friends with prime ministers and their wives, and she really had a very extraordinary life. She earned enough money to pay for a lot of her siblings to go to school overseas, and my dad came to Australia. And he came to Australia during the White Australia policy, and so that was sort of another layer of challenge to my dad's life after he'd already come through the family losing everything, the Japanese occupation, having 3 years, almost 4 years of his schooling missed because of that occupation, and then coming to Australia to go to university when at a time when the White Australia policy was in place. So inherently it was almost legitimising racism. So he went through a lot. And I know that's a long answer to your short question, but essentially him coming to Australia and then ending up in Perth, and then I came along, and that's sort of where my story starts.
Yeah, of course. Well, I guess take us through the interest for you in then writing that book. So growing up, were you always kind of good at writing? Was this a thing later in life that all this intrigue and stuff that probably built up and in retrospect you thought about from a younger age that led you to wanting to write this book? Or just take us through that image.
Yes, I always loved writing. So when I was a little girl, I loved writing stories, and I loved drawing the pictures to the storybooks. And I think that that's something that a lot of kids enjoy doing, is creating stories, because inherently we are all storytellers at heart. And I was lucky enough through the trajectory of my career to become a professional storyteller, in that I became a journalist and then a newsreader. But storytelling has always been foundational to how I express myself, and I guess how I identify. And so the book itself, it wasn't because I necessarily wanted to write a book, or that I'd thought, oh, one day I'll write a book. It was literally because my dad sued me in the Supreme Court, and that I had a breakdown, and part of my healing was to journal and to write. And by pouring that out on the page, that became a very cathartic sort of healing process for me, writing about the trauma that I felt that I was experiencing. But then in doing that, I actually explored and uncovered a whole lot of family trauma that couldn't help but have affected my dad and his behaviour, and it really helped me come to an understanding of his character and why he would do what he did, and also how I responded to that, or reacted to that at first, but then eventually was able to respond in a more centred way. So writing the book it's almost as though it was all meant to be. All of my background, my childhood, writing, enjoying storytelling, going into a creative field, going into journalism, and then this happening in my life that was a traumatic event that led me to journal, that led me to write something that did turn into a book. It just couldn't have been more perfect, in a sense. It didn't feel perfect at the time, but it seemed like that is what my path was always meant to be.
Okay. So do you think a connection of storytelling and the interest in speaking and stuff, which through now you're obviously doing keynote speaking and a podcast and stuff as well, do you think that culminated to the idea of you naturally going into something like radio, being your first kind of step in your career path?
You mean back when I had started out as a journalist? Yeah, it was all a natural progression. It was just like the storytelling. I grew up, one thing that my dad did was he started and owned the biggest backpackers or youth hostel in the Southern Hemisphere. So I grew up at a backpackers, and we had 100 people sleeping over at my house every night from all around the world, from every walk of life. We had sporting teams, we had rock bands, we had just, travellers, we had surfers, we had families, we had, artists. There were just all sorts of people that literally walked through my garden every day and that I shared a home with essentially every day. There were, obviously lots of separate rooms and buildings and the rest of it, but there was 100 people on my property, and that was a transient population because from day to day there'd be somebody checking out, somebody new checking in. So literally on a day-to-day basis, my family dynamic, if you can call it that, where I lived was constantly in flux. And that made my life very interesting, fascinating in fact, and that is what really, or one thing that really helped inform my love of storytelling and just like sitting and listening to other people's stories and just understanding how broad and fascinating the whole world is. And so that then just naturally led into me ending up becoming a journalist. But in between, and I know like much of your podcast and what you're interested in being of service to the world is helping to guide other people to find what it is their purpose, what is their purpose in life, what it is that they want to do, that they feel fulfilled in doing. And so in between sort of that childhood and then becoming a journalist, there were so many other things that I thought that I was going to do or become. I wanted to do law, and then I actually did architecture at university, and then I thought, I want to be a psychologist, and then I went out and I worked at a newspaper and I was selling advertising, so I was in sales, but then they asked me to write a few advertorials for the newspaper, and then they asked me to start doing band reviews and then restaurant reviews and then, writing proper articles. And so then I went for a spot at the WA Academy of Performing Arts. So that's where Heath Ledger went, and lots of, accomplished actors have gone. But I think Heath Ledger is probably, Whopper's biggest claim to fame, or most recognisable name that your generation would recognise anyway. And so I went there and did broadcasting, and then I went into the journalism. But it took me years to figure out where it was that my skills would be of greatest service.
Yeah. And I guess all along that journey in those few years, what were you taking out of each and every experience and opportunity that you're going through, and how you're jumping around trying to, key in where your skills and specializations might pre-exist? Yeah, what were you taking out of that? And I guess how would you pass that on to the younger generation coming into how they should be conscious of, what they're doing and what experiences and stuff they're interacting with?
I think do what you are good at. And it sounds so simple, and lots of people say that, but I actually mean it, because it's so easy to think I should be this, or I should be that, or my parents have told me to be this. I mean, my dad always said to me, you have to be a lawyer. And so that slowly, that filters into your psyche, and then you start to believe it. If somebody says it, so many times, then you start to believe it. And that's with feedback that you get from people. If people are critical towards you, and if a parent keeps saying the same thing to you over and over again, even if they think that they're being helpful, that can sink in, and then that can help inform your sense of self and your self-belief and all sorts of things. So it's really being able to be conscious of, hang on, what actually am I interested in? Like truly what lights me up? And it actually wasn't law, and it wasn't architecture. I thought that I wanted to be an architect because my dad had been, an architect and an engineer, and that was something else that he said, if you're not going to be a lawyer, be an architect. So it was just not me doing what I wanted to do. It was doing what effectively a parent was telling me that I should do, and that sounded like a really good career and an aspirational career. But actually what lit me up then, and what still lights me up now, is writing and storytelling and communication and connection. And I get to do all of those things, and I have gotten to do all of those things over 25 years of a career, and it's amazing. It's a gift. Like, it's stuff that you have to think, would I do the, I mean, not saying that anybody should do stuff for free, unless, of course, you're doing it for free for a good reason at a time. But just in general, like, would you just do it for nothing? Like, do you love it so much that you would just do it for no pay because it just lights you up? And if the answer is yes, then that is a path worth pursuing.
Yeah. And do you think it was your mum who maybe gave you a bit more space to find and follow what you enjoyed and was good at, as opposed to your dad who was, seemed to quite want to push you down a certain path?
Yeah, my dad was definitely more controlling. And I think with my mum, so what I didn't mention about my story is that my mum was an undiagnosed sufferer of schizophrenia. So she has acute and chronic schizophrenia, and she's now treated. But back then, when I was growing up, she wasn't. So she actually wasn't able to parent me really at all. And, she did the best she could with what she had. But essentially, she and my father separated when I was, 2 or 3 years old. I was raised half the week with my dad at his place in a Chinese, sort of more Chinese environment, although albeit at a backpackers with, 100 people.
Yeah.
And then the other half of the week I was at my grandparents' house where my mum was living, and that was a very British, gentrified, stiff upper lip sort of environment.
Yeah.
And they were very opposite existences in some ways, and there was a tension between that. But I look back and I can also see that there was a great beauty in my getting to have these two different experiences, because it actually has helped me navigate life in ways that I probably don't even realize.
Absolutely.
Because I had this backpackers style environment and the Chinese upbringing. I had this English, British, carpeted bathrooms sort of environment at my grandparents with my mum, who was obviously very mentally ill. And then I also had Hong Kong, where I would go and stay with my auntie that we talked about earlier. And so I sort of had these three worlds that I was able to live in and exist in and survive in, because a lot of the time during my childhood, because there was a lot of trauma involved and there was a lot of challenge that as a little girl I encountered, I sort of had these different sanctuaries. So I think most of all, Hong Kong was a saviour to me, because it was neither my mum's place or my dad's or my grandparents', but it was just a place where I think I could explore a lot more of who I actually was. And so it was probably my auntie who gave me that space to really see, like to sort of step back from my worlds in Perth, Western Australia, and from Hong Kong. I was able to just see life from a different perspective. It's more of a bird's eye view.
Yeah, no, it's cool to see how, you saw that as a bit of your space haven when you were there in Hong Kong. But even just in Perth, it seemed, with all the cultures and stuff that you're interacting with and meeting, and how that culminated, I think, for you to naturally go into broadcasting and stuff. But just talk us through the first few months or whatever it might have been in broadcasting. Where did you start? What were your biggest challenges? I think you've already spoken to what you're probably naturally good at, but talk us through that period.
So when I started in broadcasting properly, I got a cadetship at the ABC, so that's the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and I actually had previously been offered jobs at Channel News Asia and CNBC, I think, which at the time were in Singapore. They had offices in Singapore, and because I was living in Kuala Lumpur for a period of time, and this is just before I got the job at the ABC. So I'd been offered these other jobs, but they actually said to me, if you get a job at the ABC, because I had said that I'd already applied for cadetship there, if you get that, you should take it, because it's actually the best training ground for a young journalist. So I did get the job at the ABC, which was amazing, because 3,000, I'll never forget this number, 3,200 people applied for this cadetship, and 6 of us were chosen, and we were sent to, 6 of us were sent to different states to carry out our cadetships, and I was sent to Melbourne from Perth, and I don't think I'd ever been to Melbourne before. So that was amazing. So I came back from living in Kuala Lumpur to Perth, got the job with the ABC, moved to Melbourne, and then my first week in news in Melbourne was in radio. So I think I did 6 months in radio at the ABC, and well, the challenges were just, learning new processes, remembering people's names, jumping in the crew car and going somewhere to interview somebody, making cold calls to people to try to get people to speak to you that didn't want to speak to the media, all sorts of things, just finding out the rhythm of the newsroom and how it worked, how it felt, and how I could sort of fit in with it and with the people who already worked there. So that was that. But so the ABC was an incredible training ground. I did 6 months radio, then 6 months TV. Then I went out to country Victoria, which really, to be honest, I loved it, but it just didn't suit me. I wanted to be in the thick of it, in the city. And so when Channel 9 gave me a call and said, come and work for us, I jumped at that. And I was offered a job at, Channel 7, 9 and 10, and Channel 9 said, you can start next week.
Wow.
So I resigned from the ABC, and a couple of weeks later I started at Channel 9. My first day at Channel 9, so this is where it gets more interesting. Not that the ABC wasn't interesting, but the ABC was like an incredible foundational learning for me as a cadet. But Channel 9 was just like baptism of fire. So at the ABC, I think I was supported and nurtured, even though there were lots of challenges. But at Channel 9, I was just thrown in the deep end. So on the first day of work, and this is at a time where you could never say this now, but my boss said to me, you're the first non-bloody white person I've ever put on television, and don't get any fatter in the face. And so, I had to just let that wash over me. And luckily, because of my background, because of what I'd been through, because of the exposure that I'd had to all different people, cultures, trauma, you name it, like it actually didn't faze me.
Yeah.
And so there would be very many people for whom it would faze, and they'd be very upset by that. But I just thought, you know what, I'm so lucky to be here. And so I mean, it was a very racist and inappropriate comment, but, and also not just racist, like the fat comment, I don't even know which bucket to put that in terms of inappropriateness, but it was very inappropriate and discriminatory. But I'd let it wash over me. And then within an hour, my chief of staff said to me, you're going out to interview Russell Crowe.
Wow.
And so that was my first day. And at the ABC, I had been doing serious interviews, political interviews, stories that matter. Not saying that a story about a movie star doesn't matter, but it was just, it was celebrity news, a lot of it, and some of the time, and it was, what rates and movie stars rate.
Yeah.
And so I was sent to ambush Russell Crowe at the airport, which is another story, but so lots of challenges because of being a woman, being a woman of colour, of Asian background, and just news is man, woman, or otherwise. Like news is just tough.
Yeah.
And it's a really cutthroat environment, but it's also a really supportive, nurturing, collegiate environment. It's very political, but then it's a place where people who go into news and current affairs and that side of TV, they are passionate. Like you're there for a reason, because you actually want to do some good in the world and you want to make a difference. And some of us, for whatever reason, can get waylaid from that path, because when you're in it, you're under enormous pressure to deliver your stories by a deadline every day. And sometimes you can sort of lose sight of alignment with the true reason that you started to do what you're doing. And I guess as an old person speaking to a young person, I think it's always important to just keep checking in, like, what are my values? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Just so that you can realign with that.
Yeah, well, as you spoke to, you got that cadetship with ABC, then you're lucky enough and you actually had the choice to go to Channel 9 over a couple of other options. And they're some of the biggest media organisations in the country and have been for decades. What do you think, what was it like being inside those huge Australian broadcast medias and huge companies with such an influence, over the country's view of so many things across so many topics?
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I actually had the time of my life. Like, it was it was hard, it was challenging. Probably when I was in it, I didn't appreciate just how exhilarating it was to chase a story, to be up in a helicopter 3 or 4 times a week, you know, literally just flying by the seat of your pants, doing live crosses from goodness knows where. Like, we would just be sent to where the story was, and we always had great teams of producers and you know, camera crew, sound recorders. It was a real team effort every time we got the news to air every night, or every time we got a current affair to air every night, and a real team effort even up till the news reading. Like, obviously being on the road was so exciting. Like, I can't, there's nobody who can understand it like a journalist can. So when I catch up with old journalist friends of mine, or camera crews, sound recorders, like the people that we literally would work hand in hand with every day, like it was like family. And it was so, we were so codependent in a way. Like, we really had to trust one another, and we had to rely on one another. And so there was this sort of standard of excellence in these organisations that, that I guess exists in varying degrees across what are now a greater number of news organisations across the world. Like, you see your civilian journalists, you know, community journalists who haven't necessarily studied journalism, who are getting huge numbers of views on different broadcast channels, you know, just even on YouTube. And it staggers me. And I'm not going to give a commentary on that, but I will say that, you know, in the old days, or back in the day, it was phenomenal, and it was such an honour. It was such a privilege. And even up to recently, when I was still reading the news with the ABC, it was an honour and a privilege. But the teams and the crews, with the onset of technology, got less and less. You know, I went from being in a studio with like a full floor crew to a robot camera that was being controlled or preset according to what the news stories were. And so I'm just in this huge studio with a robot.
Yeah.
And it used to be people.
Yeah.
So that's been interesting how the industry has evolved in that way. Sorry, I've kind of gone off on a tangent from your question, but it was an honour and a privilege. It was super exciting.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to tell you some of the, you know, the behind the scenes stories, the checkbook journalism that took place, the exciting conversations behind the scenes with some, you know, incredible celebrities. I got to interview a couple of members of ABBA. I've been backstage with Olivia Newton-John. Although I have to temper that with, she wouldn't talk to me at the time because she was really trying to get in the zone, because she was about to go out on stage for Carols by Candlelight. But just being in the presence of greatness time and time again was just such a privilege. And it was just because of the job I had. It actually wasn't because I had done anything great. And that's the humble truth, is that journalists are just, you know, conduits. Like, we're just the vehicle for the story to be expressed through. Whereas the story, if it is about somebody of greatness, like Serena Williams, like she has achieved greatness. I was just there to be able to help her share her story.
And I guess, you know, of the grumblings that was going on in the background during this journey, and the court case that came against your father, and how you said in the book, you know, your hair turned grey overnight. When did you realise that moment would actually become the beginning of the book? And then, I guess from that as well, when did you start to feel okay to publicising that and putting all this journaling and that whole experience into a book and putting that public?
It was a very slow process. It probably took about 5 years to write it and to get it to publication. But the point at which I realised it could be a book was when a friend read the first chapter that actually didn't even make it into the book, and I and my friend Rachel, and I think you are speaking to her husband Francis on another episode, all very interlinked, intertwined, all of these people. So a friend read part of my writing and just said, "Oh my gosh, Mimi, you've just got to keep writing." And then another friend read some sort of draft chapters and just said, "This, you have to write a book. Like, this is amazing." And I was like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yep." And even my publisher at HarperCollins, you know, at the 11th hour, just before it was about to be published, I said, "Are you sure people are going to find this interesting?" And she said, "Mimi, believe me, they're going to find it interesting." Because I think when you're living a life less ordinary, which I know I have lived, when you're in it, it is your ordinary. You know, it's only on reflection with somebody else, maybe, and their insights into my life that I realise, it's extraordinary, some of these things.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting in that because, you know, when you're growing up, you're only probably given a bit of a safe haven that gave you the opportunity to realise and reckon with your passion in broadcasting and speaking. But then when it was people that gave you the confidence and direct feedback to become an author, it seemed like a given then for you that, oh shoot, I have got to write this book and put it out.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? That because people can say stuff to you and you don't necessarily go and do it.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I've always been up for a challenge and up for doing something new and learning a new skill. Like, that's the other thing that I think I would highly recommend, is just always be up for learning something new. Because we only have this one life to live in this body that we're in, and it's so important that you make the most of it.
Yeah. And the book is split up into 3 parts: old qua, new qua, now qua. And the line that really resonates with this is, sometimes the days preceding our time on earth say more about us than the days that we are here. What did, you know, learning so much about your ancestral tree and your dad's background stuff that you've already spoken to, what did that really teach you about yourself, your skills and qualities? And just provide you more context and understanding for that.
So I'm really interested, not that I know a lot about it, but I'm very interested in epigenetics and how not only is sort of the psychology of what our families have been through and our bloodlines have been through, how they impact our own and influence our own behaviours, but the epigenetics of it, where genetically we're like coded according to what families have been through. So there's like some gene that gets coded because an ancestor went through some sort of famine, you know, starvation, or is coded from, you know, a particular type of stress that they experience. And so these things actually get passed down as what, you know, like if our eye colour can be passed down, so can so many other things that we can't see that are within us, like that is part of our DNA. And people say, oh, your personality is like your aunties, or your personality is like your uncles, or what, you know, there are things that people will say and you think, wow, like how do these things happen? So that fascinates me. And I think that that line from my book about, you know, the past saying almost more about us now in the present than, you know, than anything else could say. I think it's just so powerful to know your own history and to know your family history. I know some people just aren't interested in it, but a lot of the time as people get older and they get maybe a little bit more time on their hands, they do become really fascinated in their family tree, and that it does help to explain a lot about your own personality, your own behaviours, and in understanding those things, it allows you to step outside of them and break certain cycles, because I'm a big believer that if you don't break the cycle, it will break you.
You talk about forgiveness in the book as separating the behaviour from the person. Do you feel you can teach forgiveness, or do you have to earn it through that understanding and, looking back through the archives and the ancestral tree first?
That's a big question. I don't know whether anyone can teach forgiveness. I think I try to help provide a story that can guide people to find their own forgiveness in their lives, because it's really important and helpful, and it has been important and helpful for me to have forgiveness for the people who've been instrumental in my life. My dad, to forgive him for suing me in the Supreme Court, to understand why he did that, his survival instincts, his trauma, his scarcity mindset, all of these things that helped me to understand that it wasn't personal. Felt very personal, that's why I went grey, but it wasn't personal. This was him playing out his own traumas, his own stresses, his own anxiety. He was just projecting all of that onto this situation with me. And then to be able to forgive my mum for a mental illness that was never her fault in the first place, but to be able to actually look at the resentments that have built up through my life of, you know, poor me, what I didn't have, you know, to really find the gratitude in things that I once felt I was victimised by.
Yeah. Well, another thing that you mentioned right back at the start that you also do now is you're an accredited mindfulness meditation teacher. How did someone who lived through your experience find mindfulness, being a mindfulness practitioner and that art and stuff as such a great, you know, escape or getaway or safe space?
A very safe space. Yeah, you put that beautifully. So everything has led me to this point in time. And everything that I went through with my dad and everything that I've gone through with my mum, what I spoke to earlier about realizing that, you know, a lot of people go through life identifying with a victim mentality. And whilst I didn't altogether do that, I did have some parts of me that felt victimized and felt resentful. And that whole process that led me to having sort of a breakdown to break through then led me to meditation, which then led me to wanting to learn more about meditation so that I could share it with others, because it's actually been a savior for me, and I think awakening to myself, to my behaviors, to what's conditioned, to what is me, what isn't me, what my, you know, true values and alignment are, like what I actually really want in life and why, and why I've always wanted to be of service, and how that truth now for me has language around it that I can actually understand. So, okay, I was always quite present, you know, interview with Serena Williams, whoever, I was of service. Okay, they're good things, but why? Why were they good things? So now I've sort of got this language and this structure with my meditation, with mindfulness, with understanding a whole lot of Buddhist principles. Now I understand why those were good things that actually did carry me through some pretty stormy times in my life. So I was sort of lucky that I think people like my auntie instilled that sense of valuing presence and really listening to people and really holding space with people and being able to be sort of stoic in the eye of a storm. That was really valuable, but I didn't always feel that I could be sure and confident that that was the right way. Whereas now I can. Now I can look back and I can see that the tools that actually helped me with my survival and my evolution as a person, that they were really good tools.
Yeah.
And I can also see what wasn't helpful if I look back on things that, you know, that behaviours, reactivity, judgment, those things that weren't helpful, I can now stand back and I have the language around understanding why that wasn't helpful. And understanding how, like, I'm very interested in somatic healing as well, and energy, and how trauma affects us not only intergenerationally but also in our own lifespan. And, you know, there's the expression and there's the book that our body keeps score, and there's you know, the belief and the, you know, it's scientifically proven that our issues are in our tissues. So all of the stresses that we
Yeah.
experience, they manifest in our bodies and they make us sick.
Yeah.
And I just find this whole area, it's life, it's our lives every day. Everybody's living it, whether we like it or not. And for me to just be able to understand more of that, I just think is hugely helpful, not just for me personally and the people that I love, but it's helpful for me to be able to help others with that.
Yeah. And I think that's a great note to finish on. So thank you so much, Mimi, for coming on. We covered a lot there, right through your career path journey, and probably more so, you know, understanding the ancestral and your background, and how parallel to that gave you more understanding of stuff, of your upbringing, and then, you know, the court case against your father, and just really paved the way beautifully for that whole conversation. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. And by the way, my dad is 92 today.
Wow.
So happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Dad. I know that this won't be published today on your birthday, but happy birthday.
Great.